Hey guys, tonight we step out of the Ice Age darkness and into a ring of flickering firelight, where your breath ghosts in the cold, your fingers smell like smoke and crushed pine needles, and the stars feel so close you could pocket one for later. You warm your hands, glance at shadows dancing on cave walls, and realize this trip spans everything: mammoths, mud brick cities, and microchips. So, tiny favor before we trek. You probably won't survive this without snacks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing the world light up with you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch by the embers as winds sweep across steppe and tundra. It's the waning Pleistocene, and you move with small bands whose calendars are the sky and whose maps are stitched from rivers, ridges, and old stories. Your toolkit is stone, bone, sinew, and patience. You knap flint until your palms hum, lash a spear, and learn that the world's first great library isn't parchment. It's tracks in snow, constellations overhead, and the memory of who found water last spring. The mainstream fact nestles easily here. Homo sapiens spreads out of Africa well before this moment, and by now you've reached almost every continent except the frozen one at the bottom. No offense, Antarctica. We'll write later. You taste smoke, salt on cured meat, tart berries crushed between your teeth. You learn to read the elders' voices for weather, not just wisdom. When the wind swings wrong, you pivot. When your toddler laughs too loudly, you shush them gently, because out here, sound travels, and so do teeth. Light joke 1, you invent the original silent mode by putting a fingertip to your lips, no Bluetooth required. Around another fire, someone hums. You hum back. Language ripens between embers and lullabies, gossip and jokes, becoming a tool sharper than obsidian. At a river's bend, you find a patch of wild grasses. You spill a few grains near the hearth, and weeks later you notice sprouts, bright, stubborn little flags. You're not yet a farmer, you're a gatherer with a good memory. But the idea roots in you anyway. What if tomorrow's food grows where you sleep? Historians still argue whether climate swings at the end of the Ice Age shove you toward domestication or whether culture, taste, ritual, curiosity pulls you there with gentler hands. You don't name the debate, you just press a seed into damp earth and see what happens. Dogs pad at the edge of camp, their eyes reflecting firelight like twin moons. Did you call them from the wolves, or did they adopt you first for your leftovers and excellent face scratches? Either way, you and the dogs co-author a pact of warmth and warning. At night, their breathing blends with yours. By day, you trade glances that say, "I'll watch your back if you watch mine." Light joke 2, they also pioneer the strategic art of looking deeply offended when you eat without sharing. You travel on, slipping beneath rock shelters painted with aurochs, deer, and handprints. You press your palm to the stone where another palm rested long ago and feel the electric shiver of continuity. Your necklace, shell beads carried inland, an ache of the sea around your throat, proves trade doesn't wait for roads. It follows desire. The quirky tidbit you tell a friend in a campfire whisper, somewhere far to the north, people chew birch tar like ancient gum. Millennia later, it will keep little secrets. DNA, a meal of hazelnuts, like a time capsule held between teeth. Seasons stretch. You weave baskets, shape microliths, stitch tailored clothes, and perfect the art of the camp move. Light enough to carry, heavy enough to matter. You learn the etiquette of sharing a kill and the politics of who decides when to move. Power here is personal and portable. But as the world warms and rivers wander in wider, lazier loops, the grasses you once coaxed now coax you. You stay longer each year, building shelters you intend to see again, caching food in pits lined with stone and dreams. A corner of your life tilts from hunting luck to harvest math. You notice which seeds fatten best, which stalks bow with gratitude rather than break with drama. You select and plant and select. Wheat and barley in the Fertile Crescent, millet later, rice far to the east, yams and sorghum elsewhere. These are not yet an empire's rations, but your family's insurance policy. The mainstream fact solidifies. By around 10,000 to 9,000 BCE in places like the Levant, people cultivate cereals and start to tether their time to fields. Your knees complain less about chasing deer. Your back complains more about bending over rows. Trade-offs, always trade-offs. Villages rise like slow exhalations. Somewhere that will later be called Jericho, community condenses around a spring. Elsewhere, you shape houses with packed earth and shared walls, little honeycombs of neighborliness and noise. Hearth smoke curls from roof holes. An ant tells a funny story. A child chases a chicken and learns about chaos. With permanence come awkward firsts. Property boundaries? No, that grinding stone is not communal, Kavi. Storage anxiety? Mice are tiny thieves in fur coats, and a new social weather of neighborly favors, obligations, and the occasional fence made of side-eye. Religion laces itself into everything. Seeds, seasons, bones laid carefully under floors. You press red ochre onto the dead, as if sending them with a sunrise on their skin. Figurines of rounded women nestle on shelves. Carved bullhorns glare from walls. Are these gods, grandmothers, symbols of harvest or hope? Historians still argue whether early shrines serve fertility, ancestor memory, or something stranger. Dance floors for communal trance, perhaps. You just know that when drums thrum in your chest, you feel stitched to everyone. Meanwhile, craft blooms. You turn clay with water and fire into ceramics that thrum when tapped, a little thunder cupped in your hand. In another valley, people who will later be called Joman press chords into wet clay and make pots elegant as river music. In another yet, someone figures out that firing clay hotter makes sturdier vessels and accidentally invents the oopsware line of experiments. Copper winks in a stream bed, a soft metal that takes a hammer's kiss too easily. You pocket it like a promise you don't yet know how to keep. With granaries come guardians. You invent door latches, gossip, and the suspicious glance at unfamiliar footprints near the silo. Social rules harden like sun-baked bricks. A person with charisma and loud hands starts deciding who stores what where. Another person whose jokes land badly invents record-keeping by scratching tally marks on bone. Light joke 3. Congratulations, you've basically created the first group chat, except it's on a wall and no one can mute Uncle Haroon's opinions. Your health changes, calories stabilize, but your diet narrows. Your molars complain at the new grind, and sometimes infections creep where crowding does. Yet, babies survive more often, and stories accumulate in the pauses between harvests. Games appear, throwing sticks at targets, counting stones and patterns, and so do roles. Potter, flintmaster, midwife, the person who is not allowed near the baskets because they always, somehow, sit on them. Historians still argue whether this Neolithic shift represents progress or a gilded cage, but you know that when the rain drums the roof and the hearth glows, it feels like home. On a ridge at dawn, you look back. The mammoths thin and vanish. The deer still flick their tails at you like punctuation. Villages dot the valley like freckles. Your hands carry the memory of both, the spear's balance and the sickle's arc, the chase and the chore, the feast and the ration plan. Tomorrow you'll stack bricks, trade with strangers, and risk the kind of crowd that ideas multiply. Sometimes helpfully, sometimes catastrophically. For now, you shoulder a basket and step down toward fields scalloped with green, where tiny seeds have made a very large promise. You follow the rivers like bright wet ropes through new heat. Silt slips between your toes, reeds hiss, ibises lift like folded paper. Fields you planted in the highlands now widen into patient rectangles, each one drinking from canals that glint like mirrors laid on the earth. Floodplains tutor you in abundance and anxiety. The Nile pulses on a schedule neat as beads, plant, grow, harvest, while the Tigris and Euphrates flood like temperamental guests, sometimes too early, sometimes not at all. You learn to read the water the way you once read hoof prints, by mood, by smell, by sky color at dawn. Dogs from the old camps trot the levees, ears pricked, now temple guardians on 4 soft paws. In the land between rivers, you build with mud bricks, one sun-browned rectangle at a time, until the city rises in tiers and terraces. Uruk hums, and a ziggurat climbs like a stepped mountain toward a god who prefers altitude. You carry baskets, you haul reeds, you trade at markets where copper blades wink and cylinder seals roll tiny scenes across wet clay. A clerk squints at you and asks, politely with a reed stylus, how much barley you're moving today. You watch symbols accumulate, little wedges pressed into tablets that remember what your memory might forget. Rations, debts, oaths. Mainstream fact, by the late 4th millennium BCE, in places like Uruk, cuneiform writing appears as marks on clay that track goods and, slowly, everything else.
Historians still argue whether writing begins as bookkeeping for grain and beer or as sacred storytelling disguised as math. Either way, you sign your first receipt and discover bureaucracy. Congratulations, you've invented a DMV made of sun-baked clay. Priest kings, Lugals, shout the calendar from staircases and pour wine for gods with complicated preferences. You learn temple economies run like patient animals, chewing grain into offerings and spitting out wages. Workers line up for beer rations. You sip the foamy pay packet and decide economics tastes pleasantly malty. The city's rumor wind carries delightful nonsense, like a letter from a man named Nanny complaining that a copper dealer cheated him, because even the ancient world contains customer service drama. On the outskirts, law steel loom in black stone. You run your fingertips along neat lines that claim order can be hammered into people as firmly as chisel into diorite. You glance back at the campfires of Section 1 and feel the distance grow. Once you track deer, now you track deadlines. Down the Nile you stroll past papyrus rafts and green ribbons of field laid against gold. The river's pulse is a metronome for your days. You watch scribes dip reed pens into ink and draw birds and eyes and thrones across smooth fibers pressed from plants. The air smells like wet mud and perfumed oils. Your ears catch the creak of wooden shadoofs lifting water by human rhythm. Under a high white sun, stone blocks tick forward lever by lever toward pyramids that will make your grandchildren dizzy just staring. Mainstream fact. By the Old Kingdom, a centralized state organizes massive building projects with paid laborers, bread, beer, and medical care included. No aliens required. Sorry, they didn't file the pyramid construction paperwork on time. You line up for a physician's kohl, yes, that dramatic eyeliner, whose lead salt chemistry helps kill eye infections while making your winged look very, very immortal. Quirky tidbit you store to whisper later, someone recommends a paste made with crocodile dung as birth control. You politely decide that some experiments may remain untested. You bow to concepts that feel as steady as granite. Mott, the breath of balance, the rule that truth and justice weigh out evenly like a scale's two arms. The king's job is to keep that scale steady. Your job is to plant straight rows, pay your grain tax, and listen when the gods speak in festivals. Boats slide along slow water highways carrying cedar and incense and gossip about Nubia. You pass villages with granaries like fat jars and think storage is a kind of time travel. You put summer into a mud silo and eat it in winter. When the black silt lifts between your toes, it feels like the river handwriting its promise across your skin. Far to the east you enter cities whose names taste cool and brick-rich. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro. Streets unfurl on a grid crisp enough to impress a modern city planner. Baked brick houses shoulder up to lanes with drains that whisk away what you prefer not to think about. You step onto a high platform and look down into the great bath, water deities hovering in the quiet. There's no king carved larger than life, no thunderous palaces, just standardized weights, tidy seals, and warehouses that hum with invisible order. You pick up a tiny square seal stamped with a one-horned creature in script that curls like rope. You trace it and sigh, because the Indus script stays stubbornly silent to you. No Rosetta, not yet. You grin anyway. This place manages civic engineering that honestly drains better than your apartment shower. Mainstream fact. Nests comfortably. The Indus cities standardize brick dimensions and deploy advanced drainage across large urban areas. Traders take lapis and carnelian west. Mesopotamians whisper Muluha and crave that blue stone like the sky under glass. North along lowest soft plains, the Yellow River slides, carrying the mountains in solution. Millet nods in small fields. Later bronze glows in molds, green as river weeds. You visit workshops where ritual vessels bulge with thunder patterns, and Tao Tie masks stare as if mid-chew. A diviner lifts an ox scapula to fire, listens to the crack, and translates it into a king's decision. Mainstream arrives with smoke. By the late 2nd millennium BCE in Shang realms, oracle bone inscriptions record questions to ancestors and display early Chinese writing. You hold a carved turtle plastron and feel the weight of a question. Rain? War? Childbirth? Trapped under your thumb. Farther back in time, whispers tell of a Shia dynasty. Ruins at Erlatoy complicate and entice. You file away the puzzle for later roads and later scholars. Across these floodplains, temples knit heaven to the granary. Priests recite hymns that double as weather apps. Scribes maintain calendars by stars and by spillways. Accountants count everything that can be convinced to sit still enough for tally marks. Your tools change with your tasks. A plow that bites deeper, an ard that sighs through loam, and a cooperative ox whose slow gaze says, "I am the engine now." You eat porridge and bread and something sweet with dates, and then you visit the scribe who insists your harvest needs a number before it can exist in the eyes of the state. You miss the old liberty of the step for a heartbeat, and then the bakery opens its door, and the smell of barley loaves erases your nostalgia with efficient warmth. You learn the new art of living inside big circles of obligation. A palace wants corvée labor, a temple wants offerings, a governor wants calm. You negotiate with neighbors over water rights and with deities over mercy. The skyline changes: ziggurat, pyramid, granary tower, watchpost. Clay tablets stack like small square thunderclouds. Papyrus scrolls flourish in tied bundles. Carved bones slip into baskets along with millet cakes. The world's pulse grows louder, more regular, as if a drummer has stepped into the center of the crowd and found the beat everyone can follow. You still chew birch tar gum when anxious, old camp habits endure, and you still scratch the dog's ears at dusk, because some alliances should never be renegotiated. At night, the rivers gleam under a chipped moon. Frogs practice their operas, barges creak in their ropes. You lie on a flat roof and let the city's warmth seep into your back. The bricks hold the day's sun, the canals hold tomorrow's harvest, and the sky, so close in Section 1, now hangs at a polite bureaucratic distance, annotated by calendars and festivals. You feel the first long corridors of power fill with footsteps. Soon there will be more bronze, more ships, more arguments about gods and borders, and whose law writes the louder line. For now, you breathe with the river and count the cool, steady pulses between flood and field.
You hitch yourself to the age of bronze the way a sailor ties a good knot, tight, practiced, and ready for weather. Hooves clatter, wheels whisper, and the world shrinks along roads and sea lanes that glint like necklaces at dusk. A chariot hums beneath your knees, 2 wheels, light frame, a pair of horses with glossy necks, and suddenly you're speed itself. Steering feels like borrowing thunder for errands. Light joke 1, call it the ancient world's convertible. 0 doors, great mileage, terrible crash rating. You bounce between courts that greet one another as brother because royalty loves a cozy family group chat, even when everyone's knives are polished. Across salt-bright water you reach Crete, where palaces spill outward like sunlit puzzles. Neclosis, with light wells, lustral basins, and walls alive with color. Dolphins leap in painted blues, ladies with wasp waists tilt their smiles, youths vault over bulls in a sport that your knees classify as no thank you. You walk cool corridors, hear flutes, and smell olive oil singing in shallow pans. Storage magazines cradle pithoi as tall as you. Linear A signs curl across tablets like waves. You trace them, and the script refuses to speak. Teasing, elegant, undeciphered. Quirky tidbit to savor, frescoes here include cheeky blue monkeys, which means someone sailed far enough to see them, or wanted the idea of them to caper on palace plaster. North and west, citadels rise hard and high, Mycenae, Tyrans, stones stacked like clenched fists. You pass through the lion gate and feel the old camp dog instinct whisper, keep your back to a wall. Shaft graves glitter with beaten gold masks. Later, Tholos tombs sink into hillsides like star chambers for the important dead. Down in dusty archives, scribes scratch Linear B, the first written Greek, recording rations for workers and quantities of scented oil. Mainstream fact worth tucking into your satchel, those linear B tablets will one day reveal a palatial command economy. Wanox, king; Lawagetus, leader of the people; lists of chariot wheels that make any logistics nerd purr. You pick one up and smell baked clay, bureaucracy, and a hint of olive. Eastward in Anatolia's knot of hills, Hattusa spreads its gates and its temper. The Hittite capital breathes cuneiform. Tablets pile into mini mountains, decrees, rituals, treaties, so many that a bored intern god could ski them. Horses stamp in training yards. You hear a groom recite the Kikuli method. Intervals, rest days, mash recipes, the first sports science routine your calves will never forgive. Farther south, Mitanni nobles swear oaths by storm gods, and the chariot becomes not just a taxi to war, but a throne on wheels. You file that away with your birch tar gum and your crocodile dung sunscreen as things you are absolutely not testing today. Down the Nile again, but now in New Kingdom swagger, obelisks shine and temples bloom like stone lotus. Hatshepsut's terraces step up from the desert. She sends ships to Punt for incense, ebony, and the kind of myrrh that makes scented cones melt on banquet hair. Yes, those perfumed wax pyramids are both fashion and slow-release room freshener. You eavesdrop on scribes composing love poems as tender as riverlight and war reports as confident as drumlines. At Kadesh, chariot against chariot, Ramses II meets the Hittite army in a swirling knot of dust and claims a near-miss victory with the energy of a man who understands public relations. Mainstream fact worth tucking into your satchel, the Egyptians and Hittites later codify the world's earliest known surviving peace treaty, a cool-headed slab of "let's not do that again" in 2 languages. Back on the coast, Levantine harbors, Byblos, Ugarit, breathe cedar resin and salty gossip. Canaanite merchants curse politely while loading jars, and scribes here multitask with a new kind of magic, stripping writing down to a lean alphabet that will travel farther than any caravan. You lean over a desk by flickering lamplight and watch an apprentice copy those simple signs, a toolkit portable enough to tuck behind the ear like a reed pen. Out at sea, you meet the best syllabus the late Bronze Age ever wrote, the Uluburun ship, its hull a wooden ribcage around a traveling warehouse, copper ingots by the ton from Cyprus, tin like silver loaves, cobalt blue glass raindrops, ebony, elephant and hippo ivory, Canaanite jars packed with sticky tree resin, beads for someone's bracelet, and a handful of Mycenaean cups that clink softly, homesick for a different shoreline. Gift exchange stitches big men into one international style. Amarna letters fly like clay pigeons between palaces. Brother, send more gold. My statue looks naked. Light joke 3, ancient customer feedback remains undefeated. Diplomacy tastes like wine and fig cakes, but it depends on storms not storming and bandits not banditing. You realize that an empire is a choreography. Delayed monsoon here, a grain shortfall there, an ambitious prince elsewhere, and the dance trips. Historians still argue whether the chariot aristocracies were stable ecosystems or fragile glass towers rattling with every hoofbeat. Then the weather changes its voice. Drought fingerprints tree rings, a child's bowl echoes in a storehouse. Rats discover how much they love granaries gone quiet. Trade thins, then frays. Palaces that once hoarded oil and tablet archives now hoard worries. Earthquakes shake coastlines already wavering. In letters that never reached their readers, baked mid-panic in Ugarit, officials beg for help as sails appear at the horizon like teeth. Egyptian walls later carve them as sea peoples, feathered headdresses, ox carts rattling with entire lives. Historians still argue whether these are migrants fleeing famine, mercenaries changing employers, pirates finding full-time work, or a messy confederation pushed by climate and pulled by opportunity. You only know the lights on the headlands flicker out, one after another.
Hattusa's gates gape empty, Mycenaean palaces blacken, Ugarit shrivels into ash you can smear between finger and thumb, smiths hoard little knowledge like embers in a cupped hand. On a temple wall at Medinet Habu, Ramses III boasts of turning back a tide of invaders. Even victory arrives with the sound of splintered oars. You smell wet charcoal, hear sheep bleat where scribes once recited, and taste the metallic bite of new ore edging into everyday tools. Iron, not yet king, but a hungry prince. Mainstream observation whispered carefully, across the 1200s BCE, a wide swath of the eastern Mediterranean experiences what scholars call the Late Bronze Age collapse. Interlocking failures that look from up close like a dozen different bad days. After the fires, you pick through what remains in pocket survivors. A potter keeps a recipe. A bard keeps a list of names that will one day anchor epics. A farmer keeps where the spring hides under reeds. A mother keeps a lullaby. City-states retreat into hilltops. Trade shrinks to careful hops along safer coasts. And yet the alphabet sticks. The habit of sealing deals over wine sticks. The memory of roads and sails sticks like resin to jar walls. You remind yourself that collapse isn't a full stop. It's a line break. Light joke 3, it might also be an unsubtle reminder to back up your files, tablets, off-site. At night by a hearth small enough for one family, you wrap a cloak over your shoulders and listen to wind knit the dark back together. You miss the glitter of palatial halls, the dolphins, the perfume cones, the smooth shake of a chariot's yoke. But you also feel something older rise, like heat from coals buried in ash. Your hands remember how to mend, barter, scale down, wait out a lean season. Dogs curl closer. Children sleep with stone beads under pillows for luck. In the morning, you'll walk down to a shore that once teemed with ship decks and now lies quiet as a breath. Far beyond that horizon, other webs are already tugging at their own loose threads. Empires rehearsing laws, philosophers sharpening questions, roads measuring distance into obedience. You chew a strip of dried fruit, glance at the sky for weather, and set your feet towards whatever rebuilds next.
You shoulder your pack and step into a ribbon of packed earth that keeps going farther than your ankles believe. Dust puffs, hooves drum, and milestones tick like a heartbeat carved in stone. You join riders, traders, and royal messengers on a road that thinks in continents. The Royal Road, stretching from Sardis to Susa, so smoothly that the world feels stapled together. At each relay station, a fresh horse waits, eyes bright, breath hot. A courier grabs the reins and vanishes into distance with the confidence of someone whose job description is basically outrun weather. Light Choke 1, the unofficial motto, neither snow nor rain nor heat, sounds suspiciously like no paid time off, but you keep that to yourself. You pay a toll with a stamped, satisfyingly heavy coin, Darius's gold Daric, and learn that money is a passport you can jingle. Satraps govern like well-briefed uncles. Aramaic stitches documents into a shared tongue. Inspectors, the king's eyes and ears, listen for trouble with professional calm. Underground, cool tunnels called qanats tap hillsides and lay water gently across fields. Date palms feather the sky. Markets smell of sesame, lamb fat, and wet clay bowls. Mainstream fact slides easily into your palm. Under Darius I, the Achaemenid Empire standardizes weights, measures, coinage, and maintains that long road network linking western Anatolia to the Persian heartland. You pass a domed ice house, Yakchal, storing winter's chill for summer sherbets, the kind of architectural flex that tastes like snow after noon prayers. You think of Section 2's granaries and grin. Storage is still time travel. The ticket just got colder and sweeter. Then you angle toward the sea, where city-states argue with a volume setting stuck at festival. Stone theaters sip hill breeze, agoras hum with olives and rumor, hoplites lock shields and tramp to a drum you feel in your chest. In Athens, you tie your cloak, join a crowd on the Pnyx, and discover the unruly miracle of voting by hand, by shard, by voice. The democracy is famously selective, adult male citizens only, but the habit of argument spills everywhere, into comedy that roasts politicians with lemon and salt, into tragedies that work grief like a knot, into philosophical walk-in talks where Socrates asks questions until your brain begs for a snack. You chew, out of nostalgia, a sliver of birch tar gum left over from old camps and try to look wise. Ships hiss from Piraeus on three-tiered wings, triremes, oars flashing like fish backs. At Marathon, a Persian expedition falters against the line of sweaty farmers in armor. In a tight pass called Thermopylae, you taste bronze in your mouth and smoke in your lungs. At Salamis, the sea itself seems to tilt toward Athens. Mainstream fact fastens like a pin. The 5th century BCE sees Greek victories over Persia, then a ruinous Peloponnesian War that Athens loses to Sparta's endurance and deep pockets. Historians still argue whether the famous Greek miracle, philosophy, drama, science, springs from unique local conditions or from trade-warmed borrowing across older Near Eastern classrooms you've already walked. You decide it's both. New recipes often begin with shared spice. You take the philosophers in small, medicinal doses. Pythagoreans hum about harmony, and quirky tidbit incoming, maybe ban beans for metaphysical reasons you cannot hear without laughing softly into your cloak. Plato herds forms in a cave of glittering ideas. Aristotle sorts everything that moves and some things that stubbornly don't. Physicians and Hippocrates' shadow squint at symptoms without blaming moon gods. Herodotus interviews everyone, including that one definitely reliable uncle, and invents a history that reads like a travel vlog with footnotes. Someone recites Sappho's words over a lyre. Your chest loosens as if doors opened in the rib cage. A Macedonian whirlwind then blows out the lamp and relights it on every hill from Egypt to the Hindu Kush. You squint into dust as Alexander strides through gates, worships in borrowed temples, marries policy into ritual, and tells garrisons to plant Greek words like windbreaks. Markets take up a new dialect, koine, because merchants adore grammar that doesn't argue. Libraries fatten, especially the one the Nile cradles in Alexandria, where scholars measure Earth's curve with shadows and a stick. You sip wine sweetened with dates and think of Section 3's cargo ship. The sea lanes you learned there now carry stories bound in papyrus twine. Westward you cross mountains where roads cling to cliffs with the patient audacity of an engineer. Stones tamp, rollers creak, and a straight line cuts through bog, hill, and argument. All roads lead to Rome is not a threat, it's a maintenance plan. You set your sandals on the Via Appia and feel the Republic's pulse. Legions stride in weatherproof rhythm, mile after mile. Magistrates prickle with ambition. Farmers grumble about debt. Senators rehearse serious faces between dinner parties. The 12 tables, rough but public, hang law in the daylight. No more private priestly rulebooks. Mainstream fact nods. By the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, Roman roads hardened the peninsula into a military/logistical machine, and codified law starts with those tables around 450 BCE. Water leaps in aqueduct arcs. Concrete, lime plus volcanic ash, sets under seawater like a dare to future architects. Light choke 2, you keep a polite distance from garum, the beloved fermented fish sauce that tastes like courage and low tide. Rome grows by treaties, colonies, stubbornness, and professional paperwork. You watch citizenship expand like a slow sunrise, co-opting rivals into the project of us.
You tuck a wax tablet under your arm, pay in bronze, and note that Empire, like your old granary systems, prefers standardized parts. Weights, measures, contracts, even the width of a wagon's axle. In the distance, a general named Julius writes crisp memos from Gaul. Later, an August sun slides quietly into an era of order, Pax Romana, whose marble facade hides the usual human mess, but still feels, on many days, like weather finally cooperating. Turn east, and the air shifts to the fine, dry coolness of Loess. Warring states chisel strategy into bamboo slips. Scholars argue in schools with names that sound like weather systems. Confucianism, Taoism, legalism, Moism, and you sit, again as you did in Athens, and learn to listen. Confucius sketches a world where ritual needs habit into virtue, and government starts with personal example. Lao Tzu's voice drifts like river mist, a text that reads you while you read it. Legalists sharpen law until it becomes a machine for order. Moists measure love with a carpenter's square and insist it should include strangers. In 221 BCE, Qin Shi Huang stamps his seal across the map, unifying warring polities into a single state, with standardized coinage, scripts, and axle widths. Walls link into longer walls in the north. The terracotta army ranks in silent alertness, clay brows calm forever. Historians still argue whether the famous book-burning and burying of scholars is totalitarian fact or later dynastic exaggeration rehearsed for political theater. You file the question beside Alexandria scrolls and Athens ballots as another place where memory refuses to sit still. Qin's speed burns hot and brief. The Han inherit the anvil and start hammering rhythm. Silk threads purr off looms, iron tools bite fields, and Imperial Academy lifts Confucian classics into state ideology. Officials are recommended for virtue and talent even before exam systems harden centuries later. Paper sighs under a brush. Tradition credits Kai Lun in 105 CE with improving its recipe, and bureaucratic files multiply like rabbits in a quiet drawer. Zhang Heng's bronze seismograph opens a dragon's mouth when the ground speaks far away, a machine that feels like myth until it works. Mainstream fact waves. Under the Han, caravan routes, what later ages will call Silk Roads, knit China through Central Asia toward India, Parthia, and the Mediterranean's edge, met halfway by traders carrying Roman glass and coins, spices, and stories that travel well. You sit in a caravanserai where a camel huffs incense breath in your face, and a sailor in an Indian Ocean port tells you that monsoon winds have schedules if you listen carefully. Ride out on one, ride home on the other. You smile because schedules are just roads in the air, and you've been walking roads all day. Light Choke 3,
You hear it first as footsteps, soft sandals on stone, camel bells under a hot noon, oarlocks creaking on a wind you already trust, faiths moving the way water does, finding seams in valleys and then filling them with stories. You walk beside merchants whose bundles smell of cinnamon and sandalwood, and monks who pack lighter, a begging bowl, a threadbare robe, and a patience that can outweight mountains. The old roads from your coin-rattling days turn into pilgrimage lines. The same monsoon loyalty card the sailors brag about is now punched with shrines instead of cargo holds. Light Joke 1. You still don't get points, but the upgrade to Enlightenment has excellent reviews. Everywhere you go, the air feels lettered. Verses in the mouth, hymns in the lungs, law in the hands, and you realize how easily a road becomes a rosary when people start counting steps as prayers. You start where the Ganges curls like a wrist, under trees that make their own shade. An emperor named Ashoka, yes, the one who carves his remorse into rock and pillar, pivots from conquest to compassion in the 3rd century BCE, and sponsors missions that carry the Buddha's teachings south to Sri Lanka and north through caravan towns towards Central Asia. Mainstream fact: Ashokan inscriptions and later chronicles credit him with sending emissaries and relics beyond the subcontinent, an early state-backed push that sprinkles stupas and monastic rest stops like mile markers across maps. In Gandhara workshops, sculptors tug Greek drapery over Indian devotion, and the Buddha steps out of stone with a calm that owes something to Apollo's cheekbones. Monks keep time with bells. Donors keep promises with bricks. You keep moving because the sermon refuses to stay put. It wants legs and luggage and a spare cloak pinned with a travel pin. Cold morning. Desert light. At Dunhong's edge, you duck into the Mogao caves, walls blooming with painted lives of the Buddha, donors in silk robes, and 1,000 calm faces teaching you how to breathe. In oasis towns, you sit with translators whose ink-black fingers twitch. Kumarajiva trims Sanskrit sentences until they sing in Chinese. Monks argue the shape of emptiness in courtyards where sparrows heckle like unpaid peer reviewers. A pilgrim named Xuanzang returns with pack animals groaning under scriptures and stories about mangoes gifted like small suns. Historians still argue whether Buddhism's eastward momentum owes more to court patronage and monastery granaries, or to merchants who discover that shared ethics grease deals better than any lamp oil. Either way, the doctrine bends and blooms. In cave temple coolness, you meet Avalokiteshvara shifting from princely guardian to merciful mother. In Chan halls, you watch monks sit so still that even your birch tar gum chewing feels loud. A myth whispers that a monk called Bodhidharma cut off his eyelids to keep from dozing. Where they fell, tea sprouted. Quirky tidbit, filed under Do Not Attempt, next to crocodile dung contraception, from Section 2. West, across a sea you measured back when triremes flashed, another small circle begins telling a story they think is bigger than empires. A teacher in Roman Judea heals, speaks in parables, and is executed under a governor whose name later sticks to calendars. After, his followers insist he lives. Letters fly along Roman roads faster than gossip at a bathhouse. House gatherings turn into communities. A fish, scratched in dust, becomes a sign that says, "You're safe with us." Mainstream fact: in 313 CE, Constantine's Edict of Milan legalizes Christianity in the Roman Empire. By 325, the Council of Nicaea hammers doctrine into creeds with a rhythm as steady as a mason's mallet. Baptistries echo. Bishops write to each other like colleagues, swapping footnotes. Martyrs' graves grow pilgrim crowds who trade bread recipes and miracle rumors with equal fervor. Catacombs shelter frescoes of a shepherd carrying a sheep. On a windswept ridge, you meet hermits who turn silence into a profession, the original noise-canceling. Benedict tunes a monastic rule like a garden gate: work, prayer, rest, and scriptoria buzz. Geese lose feathers to quills. Inks smell of oak galls, and margins bloom with foxes chasing knights who are arguably procrastinating. Pilgrims stretch the map's nerves: Rome, Jerusalem, Compostela, turning shrines into waypoints where bread tastes inexplicably better. You watch a mason set a cornerstone for a church whose vaults will teach light to behave. You watch a midwife cross herself before a birth. You watch a merchant carve a tiny cross into a tally stick and wonder if faith has just invented the motivational to-do list. Historians still argue whether Constantine's conversion was thunderbolt faith, cool politics, or both with incense on top. You shrug and keep walking because either way, the roads hum. On a hotter wind, syllables change again. In the 7th century, a voice in Mecca names God one, merciful, closer than your jugular, and summons people to prayer, to alms, to fasting, to a discipline that remembers the poor by design.
You feel the calendar re-zero in 622 with the Hijra, Muhammad's migration to Medina, and watch a new community reconcile feuding clans and draft law that tastes like dates and justice. Mainstream fact: within a century, under the Rashidun and Umayyad caliphs, Arabic rule arcs from the Indus to the Atlantic. Arabic itself becomes the backpack language for scholars from Cordoba to Samarkand. Under Abbasid lamps, Baghdad's House of Wisdom gathers translators who carry Aristotle into Arabic and, with cheerful audacity, argue with him at the margins. Algebra sketches new habits of number. Arabic numerals, born in India, refined on these desks, begin their slow westward stroll. After a skirmish near Talis in the 8th century, papermaking walks west in traveling boots. Mills hum. Books multiply like swallows. Light joke too. Someone invents the footnote and accidentally creates the academic nap trap. Caravans stitch the Sahara with patient thread, salt north, gold south, scholars everywhere, while dhows on the Indian Ocean time their lateen sails to monsoon pulses you could set your heartbeat to. At Kilwa, you brush coral rag that glitters like sugar. Doors are carved like lace. Mosques rise with the hush of tide. In Timbuktu's shade, you flip thick, butter-soft pages and listen to a teacher wrap law around life like a careful bandage. Quirky tidbit: when Mansa Musa of Mali makes his 14th century pilgrimage, later storytellers swear he spread so much gold that prices wobble in Cairo for years. Historians still argue whether that gold crash story is economic quake or travel writer exaggeration sprinkled with envy. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the same routes, Ibn Battuta keeps notes as if the world were a long conversation and he didn't want to miss the punchline. And because Earth insists on running multiple experiments at once, you cross an ocean of imagination to stand where obsidian glitters and pyramids point with obsessions all their own. In Mesoamerica, Teotihuacan spreads along an avenue of the dead so straight it feels like a ruler laid against the sky. Apartment compounds hum with potters and feather workers. Incense burners grin like small volcano gods. Farther east, Maya cities grow like coral reefs. Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, stepped temples rising from jungle hum, observatories peering at the sun until it confesses its schedule. You remember your old wall-scratched tallies and grin at continuity. Here too, writing blooms, glyphs nodding sound and image with elaborate grace. Bark paper books fold like accordions of memory. Ball courts thump with rubber. The game reads like sport and also like a microscope peering into fate. Quirky tidbit to savor: Maya artisans concoct a pigment, Maya blue, so stubbornly fade-resistant that murals keep their cool for centuries. The recipe blends indigo with palygorskite clay and heat like a held breath. Historians still argue whether mighty Teotihuacan directly ruled distant Maya cities or projected prestige and trade so powerfully that allies remixed its style without needing its soldiers. Then you climb, this time into an air that tastes of tin and sunlight. On Andean spines, stone cities knit to sky with a neatness that makes your ankles weep. Before the empire that poster brands the region, Wari and Tiwanaku pattern highlands with roads and ritual geometry. Later, the Inca stretch a network, the Capac Nian, over summits and along sea cliffs, more than 20,000 kilometers of stone logic persuading mountains to cooperate. Llamas blink philosophical lashes. Relay runners, chaskis, wait at tombos with lungs like kettle drums, ready to pass news wrapped in a quipu. A knotted cord whose loops and spaces count tribute.
You climb back onto the long roads you've worn thin with your footsteps, and they feel faster now, as if the ground itself has learned to sprint. Couriers hammer past with stamped metal passes that flash like small suns. Horses swap at relay stations with the practiced sigh of professionals. Silk, furs, ideas, and impatience move under one hard sky. Under Mongol banners the steppe hums, yam posts spaced a day apart, fresh mounts, warm tea, the raised eyebrow of an official who can make problems evaporate with a flick of a Pisa pass. You breathe dust that tastes faintly of lamp smoke and cinnamon and think, this is an internet with hooves. You thread through Karakoram workshops that clatter with metal and borrowed skill, then into markets where Persian astronomers parse Chinese records and Uyghur scribes translate your shopping list into something government-ready. Mainstream fact. The 13th century Mongol Empire stitches Eurasia into an unusually secure exchange sphere, what historians often call the Pax Mongolica, standardizing routes, protecting caravans, and letting paper, compasses, and gunpowder flow farther and faster than before. You compare it to Section 4's Royal Road and grin. Same trick, bigger table. But fast roads move more than silk. In mountains east of the Caspian, a flea finds your bootlace interesting. In Black Sea ports, rats practice parkour along mooring ropes. In 1347, galleys make landfall with cargo no customs officer can seize. You smell vinegar in the alleys, hear bells tolling until sound feels like rain, and watch doors marked with chalk stay shut. Mainstream fact lands heavy. Between roughly 1347 and 1351, the Black Death, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, kills perhaps a third or more of Europe's population, with devastating waves across West Asia and North Africa too. Historians still argue whether the disease moves mainly by rat fleas, by human lice, or by direct pneumonic spread bursting along winter winds. From where you stand, it moves like a rumor that bites. In mess halls and marketplaces, people test cures with the creativity of panic. Posies tucked into sleeves, vinegar sniffed like courage, a raw onion applied to what hurts, prayers layered like blankets. Venice invents the quarantine, 40 giorni, 40 days, for ships and souls, posting watch on lagoon islands where gulls scream and time lengthens. Quirky tidbit for your travel diary. Some cities wield plague doctors in beaked masks stuffed with herbs. Not actually a 14th century invention in most places, but a 17th century fashion that later artists retroactively sprinkle onto your century like a dramatic filter. Light joke 1. The look is somewhere between carnival and very stern bird. You decide not to cosplay it. Grief redraws maps inside families and outside them. Fields go shaggy. Manners discover awkwardly that wage labor exists because survivors can now ask for coin with straight faces. Guilds blink at empty benches and take on new apprentices with less grumbling. You feel something pry loose. Old social joints creak. Towns negotiate liberties. Peasants walk away and are hard to replace. In cloisters, monks copy prayers with hands that shake. In kitchens, someone invents a recipe that tastes like comfort and garlic. Historians still argue whether the plague accelerates the end of serfdom, or whether the story is patchier, regional, and slower than the neat lecture slide. You just notice wages rising like dough. Across another courtyard, a different powder reorders how thunder works. You know the smell already. Saltpeter, sulfur, charcoal, because you met it centuries back in Chinese firecrackers and Song-era fire arrows that spat briefly at night. Now smiths and sappers refine tubes, fuses, and mixtures until the earth itself can be persuaded to fall down. In Yuan and early Ming arsenals, eruptors belch pellets. In Mamluk, Ottoman and European hands, gunpowder is packed into bombards that speak in syllables of stone. Mainstream fact. By the mid-15th century, the Ottoman siege of Constantinople, 1453, deploys enormous cannons, one cast by the engineer Urban, helping break Theodosian walls that had stared down 1,000 years of irritation. You flinch at the metallic screech of load and the bright shove of recoil, a new weather of war that cares less about bronze-on-bronze heroics and more about geometry, patience, and powder kept dry. Soldiers adjust, grudgingly. Knights look at culverins and understand, late and with poor grace, that the future is not chainmail's friend. Fortifications flatten into low, star-shaped angles that shrub off round shot. Gunners learn wind like poets. Alchemists stop pretending they're not chemists. Meanwhile, in India, rockets arc noisy smiles across Deccan nights. Later Mysorean designers will make them terrifyingly practical, but you're already impressed by the idea that a stick with a steel barrel can turn trajectory into politics. Light joke, too. You rate the early rockets 4 out of 5 for spectacle, 3 for accuracy, and 1 for neighbor relations. If gunpowder is thunder, paper is weather, and you turn your palms up to catch it. You've seen paper since Han hands pulped it. You've watched woodblocks stamp sutras and charms in China. You've peeked at Korea's experiments with movable metal type in Goryeo print shops. Mainstream fact. The Jikchi, printed in 1377, survives as the oldest extant book made with movable metal type. But around the Rhine, a goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg fusses with oil-based inks, wine press mechanics, and alloy recipes for letters that snap cleanly and last long. In the 1450s, he pulls something stubbornly modular into one graceful machine, movable type printing, that bites paper with an even, repeatable pressure. Your fingers go black with ink, your ears fill with the chuckle of a press as sheets lift in steady claps. Your nose catalogs linseed oil, wet paper, and ambition. At first, the pages are psalters and indulgences and calendars, then Latin grammar books, canon law, romances, medical handbooks, and, quietly at night, the kinds of pamphlets that make bishops sigh. The unit price of a page collapses. A student who could afford a single hand-copied gloss last year now buys a book and a headache. Historians still argue whether print births modernity or merely hands it megaphone. You stand in a shop where a corrector naps on a proof and conclude that megaphones matter. A cartographer in a wool cap runs a finger over a portolan chart and adds a tiny compass rose with fatherly pride. Magnetic needles float on reeds. Mariners mutter about declination and pretend they're not guessing. Astrolabes weigh starlight in brass. In the South China Sea, a fleet slips out of Natavjan trailing silk pennants, hulls swelling with compartments ribbed like bamboo. You stand on a treasure ship's deck as Zhenghe's admirals call bearings, west to Calicut, Hormuz, Aden, bearing gifts and thunder, giraffes and grammar lists, Muslim eunuchs commanding Buddhist sailors under a Confucian court that funds a Taoist's prayer for calm seas. Historians still argue whether the Ming voyages end because of court faction, budget and drought priorities, peril at the northern frontier, or a larger distaste for oceanic uncertainty. What you feel is a door thud, then a quiet filled with coastal fishing songs and salt drying in pans. West along Africa's shoulder, you put a hand on a caravel's rail and feel a different kind of bet. The hull is lean, the lateen sails are hungry for crosswinds, and Prince Henry's school down in Sagres has turned rumor into curriculum, currents to ride, shoals to avoid, a rosary of anchorages that hook down the coast one cautious prayer at a time. In 1488, Bartholomew Diaz slips past a weather that calls itself a cape and laughs in storms. He names it Good Hope, because one does not call the shareholders by the names you screamed into the squall. You taste dried oranges and salted fish, and remember the monsoon timetables from Section 5. Oceans have schedules, too. Light joke 3. You suggest adding, arrives when it arrives, to the shipboard ETA board. The captain does not laugh. Back on land, the press keeps thumping, the gun keeps growling, and plague, never fully gone, flares and fades like a feverish lighthouse. You walk through
You step onto a creaking deck and the wind smells new. Brine braided with oranges, wet rope, and a rumor that the map is about to grow teeth. Sail's belly, gulls scold, and you watch two hemispheres lean toward each other like strangers about to trade lunches. History will call it the Columbian Exchange. To you, it feels like a planet-wide potluck with no RSVP. Maize, potatoes, tomatoes, cacao, chilies, and peanuts pour east, while wheat, sugarcane, horses, cattle, and invisible microbes ride west. The flavors are glorious, and the costs are brutal. Old world germs smash into immunities that never met them, and whole communities stagger. You bite a roasted potato, and without knowing it, you're tasting a quiet revolution. Calories get denser, winters get easier, and crowded old world cities suddenly have more fuel for tomorrow. Light joke 1. History's biggest potluck, and of course, someone still forgot to bring forks. On islands where cane rustles like paper, mills chew stalks into crystals that glitter like money. Sugar tastes like celebration, but behaves like an industry. Land, boilers, ships, insurance, and ledgers clicking together like gears. The labor is stolen. Captives seized along Africa's coasts are marched to forts, forced into holds, forced across, and forced into fields. The triangular trade looks tidy only on chalkboards. In real lives, it is a grindstone. Mainstream fact. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, roughly 12.5 million people are embarked on Atlantic slave ships, and only about 10 to 11 million survive the crossing. On Caribbean terraces and Brazilian hillsides, cane fields steam in the sun, and at dusk the air smells of molasses and exhaustion. Historians still argue whether profits from slavery were the engine of Europe's industrial takeoff or one accelerant among many. Coal, colonies, patents, skills, state policy, braided together like a hawser. You keep walking because, either way, the sugar is sweet and the ledger is cold. Silver rings like a struck bowl in mountain air. At Potosi, a mountain becomes a mint. At Zacatecas, shafts spiral downward. Coins spill into saddlebags and galleons. Mercury gleams in dim rooms, danger posing as convenience, while presses stamp Spanish dollars, pieces of 8, that jingle through Manila, Acapulco, Seville, and Canton. The Manila galleons plow the Pacific like floating bazaars. Silk and porcelain drift east, silver drifts west, and for the first time, you can trace a loop around the planet with one finger and not lose the thread. Quirky tidbit to pocket for your next trivia night. Those Spanish dollars are literally chopped into wedges for change. 2 bits, meaning a quarter, and the phrase will outlive the coin by centuries. Global trade now has a heartbeat you can hear in distant markets. Silver's clink, silk's rustle, and the low, persuasive murmur of account books. You duck into a coffee house where the floor smells like spilled ideas. For a penny, you rent a chair and a brainstorm. News sheets flutter. A captain swaps wind rumors for insurance rates. A natural philosopher argues with a microscope. A stock jobber whispers something you probably shouldn't repeat. Coffee houses become penny universities, where the tuition is a cup and the degree is a new habit of doubt. Across the channel, experimenters dare the cosmos with a motto nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it. Galileo points a telescope at the pockmarked moon and refuses to pretend it's a perfect pearl. Kepler finds ellipses hiding behind circles. Newton nets falling apples and planets with the same equations and then quietly invents reflecting telescopes because sleep apparently bores him. Mainstream fact. By the late 1600s, the scientific method, hypothesis, test, revise, settles into a cultural muscle memory that will keep flexing whenever someone says, prove it. Salon doors open on lamplight and argument. Voltaire polishes satire to a surgical edge. Montesquieu rearranges power into checks that trip tyrants. Rousseau wanders into the woods and returns with a social contract stuck to his boots. Encyclopedists stack knowledge like bricks. Printers keep the presses breathing. Censors chase pamphlets the way cats chase laser dots. Energetically, not always effectively. Historians still argue whether the Enlightenment is mostly powdered wig club talk or a broader change in reading, coffeehouse gossip, and street corner debate. You sip something hot and slightly bitter and feel a sentence forming in you. Maybe government answers to people, not the other way around. Then the air crackles with declarations. In 1776, a cluster of colonies writes that governments draw just powers from the consent of the governed. And the sentence doesn't sit quietly on parchment. It stands up and walks. In 1789, Parisians pull a kingdom inside out. Rights are declared, heads roll, and a metric system tidies measures like a friend who labels your pantry. The revolution eats some of its children, then burps up an empire, but even reaction begins speaking the language of citizens. Across the Caribbean in 1791, enslaved people in Saint-Domingue rise with disciplined fury. Years later, through fire, diplomacy, and war, the world meets Haiti. Independent in 1804, the only nation born from a successful slave revolt. Mainstream fact worth engraving on your pocket coin, those three revolutions, American, French, and Haitian, redefine sovereignty, citizenship, and the horizon of who gets to say, we. Empires panic, adapt, and rebrand. Napoleon marches law in his pockets. The civil code will outlast his boots, while cannons redraw Europe like a nervous cartographer. In the Americas, Bolivar, San Martin, and others fold Enlightenment nouns into cavalry verbs. Mountains are crossed, viceroyalties renamed, flags learned by heart. Historians still argue whether this age of revolution sprang mainly from universal ideals or from very local math. Taxes, grain prices, regional elites jockeying for power. You decide it's both. A thunderclap needs storm clouds and a spark. Engines clear their throats in rainy islands streaked with coal. Enclosure fences fields and nudges families to towns where wages glint like lures. Water wheels whir, then steam muscles in. Newcomen's clanking pump beats back mine water like a metronome for hope. James Watt, tinkerer of condensers, partner of Bolton, tightens the system until coal persuades pistons to move with useful grace. Mainstream fact. By the late 17th century, British mills scale up with Hargreaves' spinning jenny, Arkwright's water frame, and Cartwright's power loom, turning thread into a river that never sleeps. Cotton from distant plantations spins into cheap cloth. Iron flows from foundries like man-made lava. And canals and then rails teach geography to behave. Light joke 3. You miss the office? The clock invents the original always online status, but with lint. Inside the mills, the air is lint and arithmetic.
A clock's hands become a boss that never blinks. A child ties broken threads with quick, practiced fingers. A woman tends frames and counts in her head to the rhythm of belts. A man oils a crank and listens for trouble in the bearings. Cities grow lungs of brick in chimney. Nights wear halos of soot. Abundance rises. And so do headaches. Pollution, crowding, injuries, the strangeness of wages that never sleep. Historians still argue whether Britain's breakaway success is because of coal close to coasts, high wages, patent culture, empire markets, or a cocktail of all of it with a lemon twist of luck. Resistance clicks into place with the looms. Handloom weavers smash frames and leave sarcastic notes signed Ned Ludd. Even if the person is mythical, the worry is not. Machines can move your cheese faster than rent can fall. Chartists roll petitions like carpets, unions learn to sing, factory acts nibble at the workday and nudge children back to school. Across the Atlantic and back again, abolitionists grind at the moral arithmetic. Britain outlaws the slave trade in 1807 and slavery in most of its empire by 1833. Other nations follow in lurches and stumbles. You breathe a little easier when the word free starts showing up in more laws than advertisements. Steamships shoulder rivers until upstream is no longer uphill. Rails stitch counties into countries. Telegraph keys blink dots and dashes that collapse distance into nerves. Capital crosses borders faster than horses can be.
You cross a century that feels like a thunderclap. Nations tightening into uniforms, flags, and anthems, and empires painting the map as if land were a closet to be color-coded. Nationalism hums like electricity, useful for lighting a room, catastrophic if the wiring is bad. Alliances click together like a too-clever seating chart. One assassination turns the chairs over, and suddenly, in 1914, you sprint into trenches, stitched from mud, wire, and worry. Artillery writes on the sky in blunt red clauses. Poison gas crawls low. You learn the taste of damp wool and the sound of a whistle that empties your stomach. Mainstream fact: the First World War runs from 1914 to 1918 and kills millions while toppling empires, the Ottomans, the Habsburgs, the Romanovs, like dominoes that had been bragging for centuries. Historians still argue whether the war was inevitable, given the alliance knots and arms races, or whether it was a disastrous chain of very human misjudgments that could have bent another way. In dugouts, you swap bread for letters and carve trench art from shell cases. A soccer ball rolls into the thin 1914 Christmas truce like a piece nobody can keep. Carrier pigeons thread fire with tiny cameras strapped to their brave, ridiculous chests. Light joke 1. You award them 5 stars for service, 1 star for consent forms. The guns go silent at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month, and the treaties that follow feel like bandages that don't quite stick. Influenza, traveling on the same rails as troops, sweeps the world. You carry old birch tar gum as a lucky charm and wash your hands because finally that lesson holds. The interwar years stutter between jazz and jobs, radio sing-alongs and shouting men. In some places, democracy wobbles, and others, it's pushed down the stairs. Tanks learn to purr, airplanes grow metal feathers, and the next war drafts even your breakfast. When 1939 flips the table, you hang blackout curtains, count ration coupons, and stare at maps as if they were weather reports. Mainstream fact: the Second World War, 1939 to 1945, ranges across continents and oceans. After industrial murder and total war, the United Nations forms in 1945 with a pledge to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Historians still argue whether Japan's surrender turned mainly on the atomic bombs or on the Soviet entry into the Pacific War.
You only know the mushroom clouds write a new, terrible punctuation mark, and the word radiation starts living rent-free in human imaginations. Quirky tidbit tucked between grim headlines, B.F. Skinner's Project Pigeon tries to train pigeons to peck their way to precise missile guidance. Proof that creativity does not always arrive with breaks. Light joke 2, somewhere a bird demands co-inventor credit and better snacks. You watch women rivet code break in fairy plains. You watch refugees cross borders with suitcases that feel heavier than iron. When the dust thins, empires blink in surprise as subjects stand up as citizens. From Delhi in 1947 to Accra in 1957 to Algiers in 1962 and far beyond, decolonization relabels the atlas with names that were always there in people's mouths. Mainstream fact, in 1947, the British Raj ends, and India and Pakistan emerge, a partition both political and personal, drawing lines that still ache. The peace isn't quiet. It's a Cold War with hot edges. Two superpowers wire the planet like a chessboard, build arsenals that make the Bronze Age look quaint, and send polite, pointed letters through the UN while spies practice the art of looking ordinary. NATO and the Warsaw Pact face each other across concrete and ideology. Berlin grows a wall in 1961 and loses it in 1989, a night of dust, dancing, and hammers that still rings in your ears. You keep a go bag by the door and a duck and cover drill in your muscle memory. Historians still argue whether containment and deterrence worked, or whether luck, personality, and fatigue finally bent the arc. You remember how a radio broadcast could make your pulse trip. Not everything points down. You look up in 1969 and watch humans set soft shoe prints in lunar dust. Apollo 11 proving that Section 1's fire is now a rocket with calculus. You watch civil rights marchers tilt the country toward its promises. You watch green revolution send dwarf wheat into fields and calories into bowls. You watch vaccines chase smallpox to the world's exit. Under desks in universities, boxes hum. ARPANET pings, and by 1989, a shy, elegant invention called the World Wide Web proposes a way to link documents with quiet brilliance. Light joke 3, congratulations, you have just invented the world's loudest library with cats. Silicon starts whispering instructions into everything. You carry a pocket slate that outthinks the room-size machines which once demanded lab coats. Meanwhile, money flows faster than weather. Tariffs drop, shipping containers turn the sea into a conveyor belt, and globalization becomes both lullaby and alarm. You sip coffee from one continent, wearing cotton from another, while your playlist hops time zones. The good, ideas, antibiotics, and voices find each other. The bad, crashes ripple, sweatshops pay the bill, and the air gets weird. Mainstream fact, in 2015, nations signed the Paris Agreement, promising to aim for well below 2 degrees of warming. Cities plant trees, utilities add wind and sun, and engineers redesign growth with an asterisk. Historians still argue whether the Anthropocene, the age where humans are a geological force, starts with coal's smokestacks, the 1950s Great Acceleration, or the first farmer's furrow in Section 1. Your century's final act is a tangle. Genocides we swore never again about, walls that fall and new ones that rise, a pandemic that makes time soft and days blurry. You feel old threads tug, quarantine islands echo Venetian lagoons, misinformation gallops down the same roads as letters once did. Nurses wear grooves in hospital floors the way monks wore them into cloister stone. Satellites stitch a net of weather, maps, and phone calls around the planet. Drones hum like curious hornets. Gene editors snip and paste. Artists remix old pigment with new grief. A kid in Lagos, Lima, or Lahore uploads a song that finds your headphones before breakfast. And yet, with all the algorithms and booster stages, your pockets still hold the same human kit. A story, a promise, a joke you probably shouldn't tell at dinner, a memory of dogs dozing by a fire. When the power flickers, you light a candle and rediscover Section 1 in the way wax pools and shadows dance. The project you've walked, seeds to cities, bricks to servers, still runs on the ancient fuel of cooperation and the very modern trick of not breaking what we can't replace. Let the tempo loosen now. The crowded stations, the drums of parades, the sirens and speeches, let them all step back, like waves that have made their point, and agree to rest. You picture the planet from high above, not as a battlefield of borders, but as a slow-turning ember with weather combed across it, nightlights blinking like careful breath. You float there weightless, where the satellites whisper and the aurora drapes green silk over the poles, and you listen for the softest sound you learned in Section 1, the hush of people settling for sleep. You drift across a late street where a bakery closes, a desk lamp still glows over homework, a nurse checks one last chart. You pass a farmhouse where someone lays a palm against a warm cow flank, a boat where someone knots a line by feel, a tiny apartment where someone laughs in their sleep at the leftover warmth of a joke. The old pact keeps holding. I'll watch if you rest, you'll wake if I tire. Dogs turn in a circle, settle, windows dim, fans spin their round, forgiving wind. Let your shoulders go slack. Let your jaw remember it doesn't have to hold history together all by itself. The big questions, how to be kind at scale, how to be brave without breaking, can wait on the nightstand with the book you'll finish tomorrow. For now, picture a small fire, not a city in flames, just a patient circle of light where tea steams, pages turn, and friends speak the kind of low words that never need to be written down. You tuck the day under that warmth the way ancient hands tucked embers in ash for morning. Breathe in long and easy. Breathe out longer still. Somewhere a tide slides up a beach. Somewhere a train takes the bend and eases toward the station. Somewhere the first bird tests the air. Here,